Thanks, Leo, and thanks all for turning up. Great to see such a huge attendance. And Leo did promise me I'd have a packed audience, so I've got just that. So what I want to do is tell you today about a little bit about the battery chain, some of the pitfalls in the battery chain, some of the things that Lithium Australia is doing that we think will fix those pitfalls. So I'll be commenting on the industry in general, and one of the things I should say is the supply chain at the moment is completely disrupted. And I don't mean that in the sense that there are new technologies there that are adding to the benefit of the supply chain. It's very fragmented and doesn't work all that well. So what we've been doing is developing a number of technologies that stitch the parts together, and I think people are starting to listen to that sort of approach, closing the loop, vertical integration to get costs down. The company, of course, has 4 divisions within it that you can see there. There's raw materials, which is resources and exploration; lithium chemicals, which is the processing of various lithium minerals to produce chemicals that are the precursors to batteries. There are the batteries themselves, for which we have a pilot plant in Brisbane that produces cathode powders and on laboratory scale batteries. We're currently producing commercial batteries in China, and we have recycling to start the process again. There are the locations we're involved in around the world, fairly broad coverage on an exploration front and technical front, Australia and China primarily. So we believe, the only vertically integrated lithium company in the world that has shown that you can take mine waste and produce lithium-ion batteries effectively in a single flow sheet. Lithium chemicals, we've focused on sustainability, taking the materials that other people don't want that often they throw away, or the lesser lithium products and co-products from lithium mining. We've developed 2 extraction technologies: leach for the recovery of lithium chemicals from mica. Our preferred route is to take it via phosphate, which is a fairly unconventional route, and the leaner process, which targets spodumene and petalite, the more common lithium ores. What these processes provide is superior quality control, and in particular good water balance, which many of the conventional processes don't do. And there is potential to use some of the spin-offs that we've developed, and in particular the phosphate precipitation, for the direct precipitation of lithium from brines. So looking at those lithium chemicals again, the leach process has gone through 2 stages of pilot testing, 2 different plants that we've built for that, in conjunction with ANSTO in Sydney, the Australian government. That's a couple of shots of the Generation 1 pilot plant, and we hope to construct Generation 3 later this year. So that's for the extraction of lithium out of micas. With respect to spodumene, it's pretty interesting that if you look at spodumene production on a global basis, an enormous amount of the product ends up in tailings streams, and in particular fine or contaminated materials. And the converters in China are designed, simply because of their mechanical properties, to take a relatively coarse material. That means the finer materials that are generated during comminution and extraction often end up in tailings dams. That being the case, there's a market for developing a process that recovers those fine materials and contaminated materials, and we've done that by way of a caustic digestion process, not unlike the process that is used for producing alumina from bauxite. In fact, it's very similar. And the interesting thing is it actually requires fine feed rather than not operating well on fine feed. So that means if you dovetail that together with more conventional processes, you should be able to improve sustainability, should be able to improve the utilisation of conventional spodumene resources. And if we look at what's going on in Western Australia at the moment, Western Australia within a few years is likely to produce something like 5 million tonnes per annum in spodumene concentrates. Some of that, of course, will be processed in the local market through to lithium chemicals, and that's the first stages of integration that we're seeing, vertical integration in the lithium business to take some of the costs out of the supply chain. Incredibly important, but that 5 million tonnes is likely to result in 2 or 3 million tonnes of off-spec material or fine material going to tailings, which could well be processed with the LENA process and produce lithium chemicals. Taking that one step further, having produced the lithium chemicals, and our preference is lithium phosphate, as I mentioned, we have a pilot plant in Brisbane which takes those lithium chemicals and produces cathode powders, wrapped up or bundled in the assets of that company as fairly significant intellectual property in 3 families of patents that are registered on a global basis. So that plant takes lithium chemicals and makes cathode powders, and on a laboratory scale also produces lithium-ion batteries. The Australian market, you might be surprised to hear that the domestic storage market is the largest in the world. It's ahead of China, it's ahead of the United States, and as a consequence it's fairly fertile ground for selling batteries at the moment. We're seeing governments getting involved with 40,000 subsidised domestic units for South Australia, federal government's talking about providing further subsidies, but of course we do have an election next week, so one might take that as a grain of salt. But they're at least talking about those things, and in Western Australia, my home state, 25,000 remote storage facilities. It's interesting in that state that 70% of the current power distribution cost goes to 2% of the population. So it's very, very expensive getting power out to remote locations, and the power authorities, Western Power, realise that's the case, and as a consequence they're going to make small grids or standalone power facilities for 25,000 locations within the state. As I say, fertile ground for someone who wants to sell batteries. Then you've got the other applications, mine site, off-grid opportunities, utility load levelling, renewable energy storage, so on and so forth. And of course we sit right on the edge of some very populous nations that can't install grids themselves because they're island nations, Indonesia, the Philippines and much of the Southern Pacific. So what are we doing to capture that opportunity? Last week we signed a deal with one of the Chinese battery producers, DLG, to form a special purpose vehicle to market DLG batteries into the Australian market. In return for that, DLG, who currently have our cathode powders on test in China, will help us commercialise those powders and produce batteries in China, which we will then take through to the Australian supply chain and sell into that domestic market. Focus, of course, will be customer service and guaranteed delivery on time, which is something that doesn't happen in Australia and doesn't happen in many other locations. So vertical integration is really what takes a lot of the cost out of the supply chain. At the moment, you've got a spodumene producer, you've got a lithium chemical producer, you've got a cathode powder producer, you've got a cathode producer, you've got a battery producer, all trying to take a clip out of the action as they go forward. So what we need to do to get the costs down is start to vertically integrate so those things occur under a single umbrella, and not only take some of the cost out, but also smooth out supply and give the customers ultimately guaranteed supply. And we believe that'll be a huge advantage in our market. On the recycling side, this is the bit that really closes the loop. You'll see there some recoveries. We're concentrated on recovering all metals, not just the nickel and the cobalt as most companies are. Very small proportion of batteries getting back into the recycling chain. As I say, focusing on the lithium cobalt, our process recovers all the metals, and ultimately we can regenerate those powders, cathode powders, directly if required. We have bought an interest of 10% in a recycling company in Melbourne, expanding that to 18%, developing partnerships in Korea and the United States to further that business unit. And of course, potential to rebirth those cathodes direct using VSP technology, our patented cathode technology. So the plan for 2019, obviously what we want to do is capitalise on the Australian market. We want to get our cathode powders into batteries that are sold in Australia. We will use those cathode powders initially by producing batteries in China. We'll package VSPC powders with the Chinese cell production using some Chinese powders as well. And then we'll deliver those cells that are manufactured into the Australian market for packing and the production of battery packs in Australia. We will construct the third generation silage pilot plant and proceed with LENA, the caustic digest, through to a development program recovering lithium from spodumene. And then, of course, there's our resource side, the raw materials, where we will be taking Sadersdorf in Germany, our maiden resource, through to feasibility. And of course, evaluating other global opportunities. So they're the things that are required to get vertical integration into the supply chain. And if you want an investment in doing so, try this one. It's a pretty good one. You can always pop around and talk to me about an investment opportunity at the booth. Thank you.